Isabella spends a summer at her grandmother's house in the Texas countryside, only to find herself entangled in a mysterious and perilous world. Kidnapped and marked by a powerful alpha male, she discovers she's at the center of a werewolf pack's power struggle. Can she escape this unforeseen fate, or will she become part of the pack? Every heartbeat could be her last. Subscribe and survive the wilds of Texas alongside her. 1. Isabella S.P.O.V. My eyes fluttered open as I jumped in my seat as we currently were driving on a bumpy road in the middle of the Texas countryside. Are we almost there? I sighed from the back of my parents' pickup truck that we had rented out. Isabella, you've asked that over 5 times now, my brother Kyle exaggerated from beside me, throwing his head back. He was as miserable as I was. Let's go to Grandma's ranch for the summer. It'll be fun, I mocked from the backseat, crossing my arms over one another. I caught my mum rolling her eyes from the passenger seat. We had been over this multiple times when the topic was first brought up. At first I thought it would be fun, leaving the English countryside, only to realize we would be traveling to my grandma's house in the Texas countryside. Keep in mind, in the middle of nowhere. Also, the trip may have sounded more enjoyable if it was only for a week or so, not the whole summer, which meant missing out hanging about with my friends, attend parties and do what teenage girls do in the summer. But it had been decided my whole family was going to Texas for the whole summer. 2 months, which I hope will go faster than what I think. Come on, look on the bright side. I heard Grandma's got a few new horses, my dad piped up, staring at me through the window mirror. How fun. Hopefully there will be horse crap and everything, I smiled sarcastically, closing my eyes and leaning my warm head against the cooling window. I stared up at the ranch. It was just like I remembered since I was last here. Let's just remind you, I was 10, so that was around 7 years ago. Just great, this was going to be one long summer. Oh, look how big you've gotten. My grandma gushed from the front porch, rushing over to me. Her warm skin wrapped around my small frame as she embraced me into a gentle hug. I guess I haven't seen the women since I was a child, so I barely remembered her or what she looked like. Did your parents tell you I've got new horses? She grinned, letting go of me but still keeping me at arm's length. Yeah, I smiled, nodding before my dad handed me one of my few suitcases I had brought with me. She smiled before turning to Kyle, who was currently what looked like trying to find service. Also, another downside of being here: no service whatsoever. Not only am I not spending summer with my friends, but now I can't communicate with them. I trudged over to my bed, hurling the empty suitcase onto the floor as I sprawled out on my new bed that was mine for the summer. After all the greetings that took place earlier, Grandma had shown us to our rooms. Luckily for me, I got the bedroom with a bathroom and a double bed, just the same one I had stayed in 7 years ago. For the past 2 hours I had been in the middle of unpacking my 3 large suitcases into the small wardrobe space that I was provided with. I guess I really can't complain though. Kyle really got the short end of the stick when it came to rooms. He had take one for the team and take the sofa, as the house didn't have enough spare bedrooms to occupy us all. I wiped off the bead of sweat that was starting to form on my forehead as I ripped off the flannel I was currently wearing. Maybe now it's a good time to have a shower. I pulled on my Converse as I headed out my bedroom door before stuffing my phone in my pocket. If I couldn't find service out here, I was going to make it my mission to find some. I trotted downstairs and past the kitchen, where everyone was currently gathered sitting around the table with mugs of tea. Hey Grandma, is it alright if I take one of the horses for a ride? I asked, standing in the doorway of the kitchen. Go ahead, sweetie, she smiled before turning back into conversation with my parents. I quickly slipped out the front door and made my way over to the barn that was located only a few steps away from the house. I entered the barn, taking into account the different horses that occupied stalls. I quickly grabbed a saddle and reins as I opened the first stalk to the right that currently held a midnight black horse. I prepared the horse before grabbing a helmet that was probably a useful thing to use. I haven't ridden in years and I'm probably pretty rusty. I led the horse outside the barn by the reins before using a stepping stool to climb onto him. What can I say, I'm a short girl and the horse is probably taller than most people. I took my phone out of my pocket and kept it in my hand, so when I did achieve my goal of finding service, I would be able to actually call my friends. I followed the lane that led into my grandma's house and back into the main road before I walked the horse for a few minutes before spotting a trail beginning. I quickly changed the direction of the horse to follow the trail that hopefully may lead me to some service. After around 15 minutes of no luck, I was beginning to lose my determination before the horse came to a halt before a small lake. I frowned. Maybe if I keep going for another little while, I will turn around and make my way back home before it's dark. I gave the horse a small kick to give it some encouragement to cross the lake. It did as it was told, and I felt the water collide with the botrichard of my ankles as the horse noisily splashed across the shallow lake to get to the other side. As we finally crossed the lake, my phone lit up, and to my delight a few bars appeared in the corner of my phone. Who knew that crossing a lake would make so much difference? I smiled, taking my helmet off. Maybe I should find a place to sit and give the horse a break before I spend some time taking advantage of the service. I quickly moved the horse onwards, knowing that I could spend at least another half hour here on my phone before I should head back. I was about to settle down when I heard a twig snap just a little bit onwards ahead of me. The horse I was currently on took a step backwards as if it was about to be spooked. I sighed, patting the horse, trying to help it calm down. It was probably just the wind. My head snapped to the side when I heard the noise of a twig snapping again. Only this time much louder and much closer. Maybe I shouldn't have came out here alone. I jumped as the noise sounded again, only followed by a low, deep growl which made the horse start to make noise loudly. My eyes widened in fear before I saw something black dash throughout the tress before I felt the horse jump widely without any warning, sending me flying off the back of the horse and landing with a hard thud on the ground, my head banging of a large rock, before everything went black. To Isabella SP. Oh. A strong sweet smell filled my nose, a masculine and wood scent. Made a voice growled out which was barely audible, which made my heart beat what felt like 10 times faster. Something attracted me to this voice. I wanted to hear more of it. It was calming. I liked it. She should be coming around soon, Alpha. Maybe a day or so. A very faint robotic voice sounded, making my head only thump louder. Shouldn't she be awake by now? A deep voice snapped, only this time the voice was becoming louder. It was the same deep voice from earlier. It was back. She took a hard hit to the head. Alpha. She's human. Give her time to heal, another voice faintly replied. What did he meant about my being human and giving me time to heal? Heal from what? I felt my eyes flutter open as I was met with a white ceiling that was above me before I moved my view to my surroundings. My eyes felt heavy, but I could recognize a few items in the room. I noticed that I was laying in a large hospital bed with a large needle coming out of my wrist. That confirmed my assumption that I was in a hospital. However, I can't remember how I got here. I attempted to lift my head only to be met with a pounding pain that made me groan out in pain. Where was I? Where was my mom, dad, grandma, and Kyle? Surely if I was in a hospital they would be here. I began to feel panicked as I realized I was all by myself and I had no idea where I was. I looked to my wrist that contained the 4 needle. I winced before grabbing a hold of it and closing my eyes before pulling out from my skin, which made a cry escape from my lips. In an instant the door that led to the outside of the hospital room was busted open as 2 women and a man came hurrying in, their eyes wide with shock as they stared at me. However, they didn't stare long before they were quick to react, grabbing the 4 needle I had just pulled out and attempting to grab my wrist to put it back in. I let out a loud scream in protest as I attempted to realize my wrist from their grip, but it was hopeless as I felt as if all my energy had been drained as they pinned me down, acting as if my screams and kicks weren't affecting them. We need something to calm her down. I've mind-linked the Alpha, but he won't be here for another hour, the man worried as he continued to hold down on my wrists, which they successfully got the 4 into. We have nothing to give her. Everything is too strong for her, one of the nurses fretted as she searched the cupboards. I struggled to get my wrists free from the doctor's and nurse right hold, before the doctor looked over at the other nurse that was holding my down before nodding. In one swift movement they had placed cloth around my wrist, attaching me to the poles of the bed, keeping me in place. I cried out before I gave up the struggle and fell limp against the bed, letting heavy uneven breaths escape my mouth. Luna, it's okay. Alpha's going to be here soon. One nurse smiled gently at me before the other nurse swatted her on the arm, causing her to jump back, sending the nurse a glare as she rubbed her arm. Don't confuse her even more, Jean. The poor girl is probably scared out of her mind, the other nurse scolded as she frowned down at me, sighing. The other nurse, who looked much younger than the second, who I now knew by the name of Jean, nodded her head before turning to look at me once more and leaving the room. Who was Luna? Who was Alpha? These questions swarmed around in my head, only making it pound louder. The doctor had now left the room before he mumbled something quietly to the other nurse that I couldn't pick up. The nurse had now retreated to sitting on a stool in the corner of the room, her eyes set on me. I'm pretty sure she hadn't blinked in a few minutes. I closed my eyes tight. I have to be dreaming. Maybe if I fall asleep I will wake up again in Grandma's house and escape this horrible nightmare. I felt my eyes become heavier as I drifted off into a sleep that would hopefully lead me out of this strange place and back to my grandma's home. The same sweet masculine, wooden scent filled my nostrils as I felt my heart beat widely in my chest. She woke up about an hour ago, Alpha. She was screaming and kicking and managed to get the 4 out of her wrist. I heard a voice say loudly from right beside me. It was the same as the doctor's voice from earlier. I'm still here. What if this isn't a dream? How am I going to get back to the house? Am I ever going to see my family again? We held her down, but we had to tie her to the bed. Alice stayed her to watch over her to make sure she didn't escape. After that, the same doctor's voice said. I felt my head begin the pound again, and I so desperately wanted to rub it with my hand, but my hand was restrained still from the cloth. I should have been here, a deep voice grumbled out. The voice was familiar from earlier, but this time I could hear it more clearly. I wanted him to speak more. I felt as if my head pounded when the other spoke, but when he did, the pain subsided. I couldn't open my eyes as much as I wanted to. If these men knew I was awake, God knows what would happen to me. But maybe if I showed them I was awake, they would let me leave and go back home. Unlikely, but I mean, it's better than laying here and doing nothing about my current situation. I fluttered my eyes open that surprisingly felt light as I let my eyes take in my surroundings once again. Yep, same white hospital room with the same doctor standing on one side of me. I looked to my other side where the smell was attracting me before widening my eyes. Standing there was a tall, well-built muscle man. His jaw so sharp it could cut through anything. His piercing gray eyes staring through my own green ones. He had some stubble resting on his chin and had ashy-colored hair. I wanted to reach out and touch him, but I wouldn't allow myself to. This man could be dangerous. I don't know why I'm feeling like this. Plus my arms were restrained. My heart beat widely in my chest. It almost felt as if it was about to pop out as he reached a tan hand over to me, placing it on my warm cheek before I felt sparks connect with my cheek. I let out a small scream, jerking my head away from the man's touch, only causing my head to pound so loud I had to close my eyes to deal with the pain. What just happened? Why did I feel sparks on my cheek where he touched me? What were these people doing to me? Get out, the same deep voice barked to what I presumed was the doctor, as he was the only other person in the room. I breathed heavily and I soon heard the door shut, but my eyes remained tight shut. I'm not going to tell these people anything. Open your eyes, the same voice that sounded so harsh just seconds ago mumbled softly at me as I felt a dip in the bed. I remained the same, my eyes shut before I felt sparks erupt on my wrist. The same as a few minutes ago on my cheek. This time I couldn't pull away as I previously had done. Soon the sparks died down as I peeked my eye open slightly to see that he was untying the cloth knots that had kept my tightly bound to the bed. Once one of my hands were free, I quickly went to untie the other hand. My eyes now fully open again before his large hand wrapped around my small wrist and slowly and gently brought it back to my side. Only one for now, love, he mumbled, his voice coming out huskily. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I looked over at the bedside locker beside me to see a drink sitting on it. I desperately wanted to chug it down, but God knows what it really was. Do you want a drink of water? The man asked, nodding towards the glass sitting beside me. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to. I didn't recognize any of these people. They could be killers for all I know. I'm surprised I haven't been killed just yet. The man sighed before he reached over to the bedside locker before grabbing the glass and bringing it to my lips, only for me to turn my head. You need to drink, his voice commanded, however not as soft as the first time. This time he was much more harder and stern. He was becoming impatient. Look, it's water. There's nothing in it, he shot back before brining the glass to his lips and taking a gulp of the liquid that I so desperately craved and needed. I just closed my eyes in return as I heard the glass slam down on the bedside locker before the man got up of the bed, and I heard the door noisily slammed shut. How am I going to get out of here? 3 Isabella S.P.O.V. My eyes snapped open to revel the same hospital room. I am so screwed right now. Where was my mom? Dad? And I hated to admit I even missed Kyle. I felt a tear fall down my cheek and I quickly reached up to sweat it away. I needed to get out of here fast while no one was watching over me. I looked at the cloth that still bound my wrist to the bed before desperately attempting to untie it. It was hard doing it with one hand as the knot seemed to go on forever, but eventually my hand was free. I rubbed both my sore wrists as I looked at the 4 in my wrist before I grabbed a hold of it, closing my eyes tight and yanking it out for the second time now. I shakily tried to push myself up from the bed, ignoring the pounding in my head. I don't know how long I've been here for, but I'm guessing it's been a while. My whole body felt stiff and drained from energy as if I haven't moved in weeks. I reached my hand up to my pounding head before realizing there was a bandage wrapped tightly around it. Maybe that what was causing the pounding sensation every second. I gently pulled on the bandage, unwrapping it, relieving myself of the pounding pain, only to be left with a less sore dull pain. I shakily put my bare feet to the ground before standing up. I took a deep breath as I looked down at what I was wearing, a hospital gown. How could I possibly attempt to leave if I was wearing this? Where had my other clothes been put? I scanned the room intensity before my eyes landed on my Converse that were laying on top of my folded clothes. Bingo. I pulled on my last shoe before reaching in my pocket, searching for my phone only to find no such luck. Those marshmallows stole my phone. I quickly made my way to the door, slowly reaching for the handle. If this was a hospital, I could notify someone that I had been kidnapped and could call the police. I opened the door holding my breath, peeping my way outside before taking a step into the corridor and closing the door behind me. My eyebrows furrowed in confusion as I looked around the corridor. This wasn't a hospital corridor. It was filled with gold frames with pictures of different people. Where exactly was I? I stepped further down the corridor, allowing my feet to guide me in any way direction as I picked up the pace. The corridor was completely empty, no doctors, no nurses, absolutely no one. I took this at an advantage before I turned into a small jog. If I was right, the doctor would be coming to check up on me soon, so I only had a small amount of time to get out of here. I stopped after a few minutes, leaning against the wall, taking deep breaths. My head was spinning now, and I felt as if I had no energy left. I sighed, holding my hand up to my head in an attempt to stop it from spinning, closing my eyes and allowing myself to take a few seconds breather. Suddenly a roaring pain shot through my chest, causing my knees to buckle from underneath me, and you hit the ground. My butt blocking the fall as I grabbed my chest, hoping for the pain to stop. A loud growl erupted through the whole place, and I'm pretty sure the ground started to shake. I knew that growl. It was that man with the sparks. My eyes widened as the smell that made me want to run towards it entered my nose. He was here. He was going to find me. He knew I had tried to escape. I looked widely around me, seeing a door opposite me before I swiftly crawled over to it, opening it and quickly shutting it quietly as possible. I leaned against the door, letting out a sigh of relief. My eyes scanned over the room and my eyes widened. The walls of the room were painted black with silver chains connected to the walls and the floors. Where was I? Some type of torture chamber. I spotted a window and pushed myself off the floor and walked over it. The pain in my chest had only got worse. It felt as if my heart was being ripped out, but I ignored the pain. If I don't escape now, it will be too late. I opened the window, looking down, seeing that it was bright outside. The only problem was that it looked as if I was on the third floor. I sighed in frustration, looking to my side to see multiple green vines leading to just above the ground. I shakily got up on the window ledge and reached my arm over to the nearest vine, wrapping my shaky fingers around the vine before pulling it to make sure it wouldn't snap as soon as I put my whole weight on it. I took a deep breath before reaching my other arm and wrapping it around another vine before hauling myself out of the third floor window. Shit, I cursed as I felt myself slide down the vines at a very fast speed. I had no upper body strength at all. What did I expect, and especially not now when I feel as though I could sleep for a month. I landed on the leaf-covered ground with a loud thud which made me cringe as I leaned against the vines, breathing in heavily. I've come this far, I need to keep going. I hauled myself off the ground before taking a few shaky steps before I found my balance and began sprinting to a forest. I knew if I found the stream, I know I would be able to find Grandma's house. That is, if I'm actually near Grandma's house. I felt my chest get tighter as I ran further away from the house. I stalled hard and stopped running after 5 minutes into the forest, leaning against a tree before the smell that I loved but now changed to hate filled my nose. He's coming and he's gaining on me. I quickly gathered myself together before running through trees when I heard the honking of cars. I must be near a town. I pushed aside the pain in my chest before pushing myself to run even further. If I got to a shop, I could use the phone to ring my grandma's house. The trees soon started to disappear as I was now running on a footpath. I probably looked like a mess right now. For one thing, I was probably covered in dirt and leaves from climbing down the vine, and my hair was probably in tats. I took deep breaths before coming to a slow jog as I crossed a road heading for a shop that seemed fairly empty, with a middle-aged woman standing behind the counter flicking through a magazine. I quickly pushed open the door of the shop and the lady's head snapped up at me and widened before she quickly closed her magazine and stood up straight, staring down at my probably messy appearance. I need help. Do you have a phone? I managed to stifle out as I stepped away from the windows of the shop, afraid that they will find me. The lady took a minute to register what was happening before she quickly nodded her head, holding out her hat for me to take as she motioned me to come into the back room. "Oh sweetie, it's okay," she smiled reassuringly as I let my shaky hand hold onto hers as I could barely keep my tears in and let out a small cry, a few tears streaming down my face. She led me over to a small stool behind the register as she disappeared for a moment through a door, and reemerged shortly with a phone in her hand. I gratefully took the phone of her before letting my shaky fingers glide over the numbers. I had barely Alexander punched into the phone when the door is slammed open, making my eyes dart up from the phone to see the doctor standing there, his eyes going wild. I let out a cry as a few tears slid down my face as I stood up, backing myself away from the door until I hit a thud at the wall behind me. The lady looked at me and took the phone out of my hand and shooting a glare to the doctor that didn't so much look like a doctor anymore in a pair of jeans and a shirt. "Get out of my shop now or I'll call the cops," the lady warned before dialing 999 on the phone that she had now placed to her ear. "I'm only trying to help her." "Isabella, come on," the doctor reasoned as he looked at me, his eyes getting darker by the second. "Isabella. He knows my name. How does he know my name? I never said anything like that to any one of them creepy people." "Out now," the lady spat out in disgust as she grabbed a bat that was stuffed underneath the register and held it up in the air as she stared towards the man. No trace of fear to be found. I'm going," the doctor exclaimed as he backed away towards the door, raising his hands up in surrender as his eyes flickered towards the bat before they turned on me. "He's going to find you, Isabella," he spoke in a quiet voice before the door slammed shut, and there was no trace of him left behind. I felt tears stream down my face as I started to shake violently. I just wanted to go home, not to Grandma's house but to England. He wouldn't find me there. For Isabella S.P.O.V. My eyes fluttered open to be met with a white ceiling which made my heart beat fast and causing me to fly up from my lying down position only to realize I was laid in my bed at my grandma's house. I took a deep breath. I can't keep getting scared, for every time I wake up I will be in that horrible hospital room, trapped again. It's been 2 days since Over got back, 2 whole days since that lady had gave me that phone and I called my parents, 2 days since I've seen him. I shivered at the thought as the doctor's words rang through my head like they have done for the past 2 days. "He's going to find you, Isabella." I shook my head as if I was physically trying to get the thoughts out of my brain. I felt as if it was all I was thinking about recently. I sighed, throwing my legs over the edge of the bed and holding my chest. It had gotten worse as the days went by. As soon as we got back to England I was arranged to see a doctor. And in fact, as soon as I returned to my grandma's house, the first thing my parents decided to do was to book the earliest flights back to England, which was Richardoro afternoon. I couldn't say I wasn't happy. I got what I wanted to go back to England, but it came at a cost. I can barely step outside now without being paranoid that someone was watching me. The last 2 days have been a blur, honestly. I've been questioned by the police 3 times now and I repeat the same things over and over again. I told them where I thought the house was, but they searched but hadn't found it yet. My mind was foggy that day. I opened the bedroom door before slowly wrapping my arms around myself and walking downstairs, stopping just aside the kitchen door, which was slightly open so I could hear the conversation going on between my parents and my grandma. "It was the Alpha, that's what she said. She must have trespassed on their land, that's why they held her captive. We need to get her out of here as soon as possible. I've heard stories about him and trust me, he always gets what he wants," my grandma's voice explained. "She knows him. She knows the man that took me. Why hasn't she told the police about him? What has she been lying about? We will keep a close eye on her. The little lassie is frightened to even go to sleep at night," my dad sighed. I gulped hard. They are acting as if they know who took me. If so, why haven't they told the police? There was something that are hiding from me. I turned around before walking towards the stairs and sitting down, pulling my knees up to my chest. Soon I will be back home and won't have to worry about him coming to get me. I'll be far away from here and I'll never come back. I place my hand on my chest to try and soothe the pain. I've been taking tablets but nothing seems to get rid of it. It seems as though time passes, it only gets worse. "Eminencia?" Kyle asked as he clicked his fingers in front of my face, snapping me back to reality as I stared out the window of the living room. "Emimich," I mumbled, turning my head to look at him to see that his eyebrows were furrowed and wrinkles had appeared on his forehead. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, turning back to look at the window. My mind was swarming with what I heard Grandma and my parents talk about this morning. Why hadn't the police not found the house I was in? I gave them details for where I ran. They should have found it by now. "Your face is getting all red," Kyle frowned as he held the back of his palm up to my head. and quickly pulled it back, staring at me with wide eyes like I had poisoned him just by touching him. "You're boiling," he exclaimed as he quickly stood up from his chair and rushing out of the living room. I felt my head with the back of my palm, and sure enough, I was boiling. What was happening to me? Grandma rushed back in the room, followed by Kyle. Mom and Dad were currently out leaving our rental car back to the place that we had originally planned to keep for 2 months. She held a wet face cloth in her hand, her eyes laced with worry as she placed her hand softly on my shoulder before ushering me upstairs. I followed her upstairs, a worried and confused Kyle trailing behind us as I laid down on the bed outside of the covers and the face cloth was placed on my forehead in an attempt to stop the burning. I let out a small cry as pain exploded through my whole body. I was now underneath the covers. My whole body felt like I was naked in the Antarctic. Pain was exploding from each area of my body, especially the chest as I grabbed onto the headboard. It was now 8:00 p.m. at night. My pain had gotten worse throughout the day. It started as what was thought as a temperature but now had escalated into this. My mom and dad had arrived home earlier, and as soon as they saw me they demanded they should take me to the hospital. But Grandma disagreed. I couldn't hear why, but all I know is that the pain isn't going to stop soon. The door of the room opened and in walked Dad and Grandma, who had a few blankets threw over his shoulder as he gave me a sympathetic smile. "Here you go, sweetie, try and get some rest," he said soothingly as he placed down the blankets beside me, covering me with them, as I continued to shiver underneath them. I felt tears slide down my face as the pair gave me sorrowful looks and left the room once again, closing the door softly behind them. "If she's no better, Richardoro, I'm bringing her to the hospital," I heard my dad faintly grunt out from behind the door. "What's the hospital going to do?" "Nothing, it's not going to stop," Brad, a very faint voice replied. So faint I could hardly make out who said it, but I presumed it was my grandma. "How will it stop?" my dad asked. He sounded so broken, like all of this has weighed him down. "I don't know, Brad. I don't know," my grandma replied as she sighed before I heard loud footsteps leading away from my room, signaling they had left. "The pain won't go away." "What do they mean the hospital can't do anything for me?" "Of course they can." I shut my eyes as I felt them become heavier. Over the past 2 days I would say I've got just 6 hours of sleep. I couldn't sleep, but now it felt as if I couldn't escape sleep. "Alexander's P.O.V." I grunted at the pain that exploded in my chest, banging my fist against the wall of my office, leaving a large dent in it. We had been separated too long and the mate pool was trying to get us back together. The pain was durable for me. I was an alpha, of course, but my fear was for my mate, a human. She was probably going insane right now with pain. I closed my eyes. If I hadn't have left her by herself long enough for her to escape, this wouldn't be happening. She would be here with my safe in my arms. I can't help the anger I feel towards that. I has to be the alpha that got a human mate. When I get her back she will be punished for trying to leave me. I let out a growl at the thought of her being exposed to the outside world. She was so small and fragile. When I saw her lying up in the hospital bed, my wolf wanted to mark her right there. But when I saw how frightened and fragile she was, I couldn't. It would kill her if I marked her in that sort of state. I regretted the fact that I didn't. If I did, I would have kept her in my sight at all times, what I should have been doing all along. I growled out, how could I be so stupid to let her go? I clenched my fists just thinking about it when a firm knock sounded throughout my office. "Come in," I bitterly spat toward the door, revealing my beta, Caleb. "Alpha, the warriors are ready," he firmly spoke loud as he looked up at me, and all the papers splattered throughout my desk. I haven't been able to concentrate on anything since she arrived here, and especially not that I knew that she could be in danger. I stood up from my desk, walking over to the door leading to the hall where my beta stood. It was time to go get my mate back. 5 Isabella SP.OV. I rolled over my eyebrows, furrowing as I kicked of the sheets from my sweaty body. I was absolutely roasting again as I felt like my whole body was in fire. A masculine scent filled my nose. It smelt like wood, and the outdoors, which felt like it made the burning subside before a feeling of dread washed over me. He want here, was he? I must be imagining this. I was defiantly imagining this. He doesn't know where I live. It's late at night and I'm just paranoid. I sighed, reaching over and grabbing the phone from my bedside locker. It was my grandma's old phone, as mine went missing from the incident. I guess it was my replacement until I got back to the UK. I switched it on, wincing at the bright light it provided before checking the time, which read 3:30. It's been like this for the past couple of nights. I would be awake all hours and fall asleep in the day. I sighed, turning the phone off, placing it beside me before I sat up and reached over to the bedside table, switching on the white lamp that was placed there. I sighed, placing my hand on my forehead that began pounding again. I can't wait till I get back to the UK. Hopefully this pain will go away and I won't have to worry about this ever again. I lay down closing my eyes but jolted up when I heard a loud howl coming from a short distance away. Wolves. Couldn't Grandma have warned me before I went out into the forest that this place was infested with wolves? I sighed, getting up, throwing my tan legs around the side of the bed before getting up and making my way towards the bathroom, which was already connected to the room. I turned the bright light on before resting my elbows on the sink, looking at myself in the mirror. My cheeks were still blotchy from crying and my eyes were still raw with horrible bags drawn underneath them. I turned on the tap and splashed cold water in my face before I heard a bang from my window outside, making me jump slightly. I took a deep breath. It was probably something that flew against the window and I'm just being over paranoid. I was on the second floor. What on earth could get up here? I reassured myself before I grabbed the bathroom door handle and slowly opened it, ready for something to pop out, but sighed in relief once I realized my room was in the exact same shape and no one was here. Well, at least from a book laying on the floor. I frowned and walked towards the window to pick it open, when the wind gushed towards me. I don't remember leaving that open. I shook my head. I probably did earlier, or Grandma or something, to air out the room. I walked back towards the bed before putting the book back at its original spot and climbing into it, keeping the covers at the bottom due to how warm I felt. I reached over and switched off the lamp, letting the room get taken over by darkness, and lay down and closed my eyes, which I felt get heavier by the minute. My sleep was catching up on me. I felt another gush of wind and opened my eyes only to be met with a pair of striking gold ones, which stood out against the black room. My eyes widened in terror and, unable to speak, my mouth opened to let out a scream when a warm, large hand clamped around my mouth, causing a tingly sensation to erupt from the touch, preventing me from making a sound. "Miss me, Isabella." The deep voice muttered, his voice coming house husky as his lips grazed my ear. The pain I was feeling in my chest before vanished at his touch, but I was soon brought back to reality when I felt my body being effortlessly lifted off the bed. I moved my fists, punching them into his chest as I attempted to get him of me. I wasn't going to be taken as easily. I was the first time. I felt his hand grip tighter on my wrist and his other stayed firmly around my mouth, not pressing hard but hard enough to cut off my air supply. I felt myself being put on the bed once again gently, and his hand let go of my wrist, moving to my waist as his golden eye came closer to my face. They were the only thing I could see right now. "Think wisely about your actions, Isabella. My men are around this house right now and a split second your family is gone," he threatening, his voice low but loud enough so that I could hear him. I closed my eyes. There was no way I could fight him of. He even had other men with him. I didn't doubt him. I'm sure if he was willing to kidnap a 17-year-old girl, he would do the same to my family. I felt myself being lifted off the bed again, this time without force, as I was carried towards my window that was once again open. The cold wind hit my bare legs, making me shiver. However, I already felt myself currently shaking from the previous events that were going on. My eyes widened as he opened the window fully and thrusted his large frame through the medium-sized square, along with me that was now clinging onto his bicep. I looked down at the distance from the window to the ground. I think he was trying to get us killed. I shut my eyes tight before I felt a gush of wind, and I knew that it was my last moments. The man was bound to drop me and I couldn't withstand a fall like that. I would surely break my neck. Him, however, he was covered in muscle, maybe he could survive. A soft thud was heard and I opened my eyes only to realize we were on the floor. I didn't die, I survived. He just jumped from the second floor, and as he walked it looked as if it didn't faze him at all. Was he even human? I felt my head get a little light as I was set down to the floor, my shaky legs just about able to stand up as his hand remained clamped over my mouth and held my back against his chest, keeping a firm arm wrapped around my waist to ensure I didn't try run. I flew my hands up to his hand, which made sparks erupt from my hand, causing me to pull away for a second before I flew them back and attempted to pry his strong hand away from my mouth. He weakened his strength of his hand over my hand, and I successfully removed it as I took deep breaths to comprehend what had just happened. I won't be as lucky this time. I'll never get away now. I'll be on 20 Alexander Hour watch. I had my one chance and I blew it. I was supposed to go back to the UK. Richardora, what were they going to do now? Did you really think you would get away? The man chuckled, his chest moving up and down slightly. He was finding amusement in this. He was enjoying torturing a 17-year-old girl. I kept my lips tight together. I wasn't going to speak to him or anyone else for that matter. If he wanted me to talk, he would bring me back home. He spun me around so that my front part was pressed against his chest. He towered over me completely. I stood at a small 5'2" and he looked around 6'5", over a whole chest and neck taller than me. Not to mention his chest was wide and well built and muscle popped out of his arms and his boiling warm bare Richardac that I assumed had a six-pack but hadn't looked at. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. Silent treatment. He questioned, his eyebrow raising slightly, his smile dropping. I looked away from his face and stared at the trees that surrounded me as the wind blowed my long brown hair into my eyes. He picked me up once again, this time with much more forceful, as he threw me over his shoulder lazily, as if I weighed nothing, and began walking quickly into the forest. The wind was now getting colder, which made me shiver slightly as I was in bare arms. After a few minutes after walking, he stopped walking and set me gently down on the forest floor, setting me against a tree, placing his hot hand I could feel through my thin t-shirt on my waist before craning his neck around, staring into the darkness before two men revealed themselves from the bushes. They were big, however not as big as the man in front of me, and they walked forward, nodding their head towards the man before one of the men came forward holding something black in his hands, handing it over to the man. He turned back to me before letting go of my waist, before taking the black object in his hands and holding it up to me, revealing a large jumper. I kept my hands at my sides as my eyes stared straight into his. I wouldn't need the jumper in the first place if he hadn't have kidnapped me. He angrily got the jumper before forcing it onto me, pulling it angrily over my head. I struggled against him, attempting to push him away, but my attempts were invalid as he shook me off easily, his hand shooting to my waist when he was finished. Her turned around before nodding towards the other men before they disappeared back into the woods, as if they were never here. He turned back before his hands were placed on my waist, holding me in the spot, as he leaned down his hand, leaving my waist for a brief second to push my hair out of my face. I let out a shaky breath as he bent down, his lips coming in contact with my neck as I turned my head away, breaking the sparks. A growl erupted from his chest as he leaned himself on me, not completely but enough to keep me still. "You're mine," he growled, slamming his fists into the tree that was currently behind me. I swallowed hard and looked down to the ground. "All mine," he whispered before his teeth sank into my neck. "6 Isabella's POV. I marked her," a familiar voice rushed out as I felt my whole body being touched by warm hands that calmed my burning skin down, but only enlightened further sparks and shingles that were erupting from my neck. The voice calmed the rate of my heart down before I realized what was happening. I wasn't dreaming, I was here, I was kidnapped for the second time, and the man had me. I felt my eyes flutter open, revealing a blurry room as my eyes hadn't adjusted to the brightness of the room. I made out two figures before I realized who one was. It was the man that had kidnapped me. I searched for the second one, not to realize it was the doctor from the first time I was here. My breathing became heavier as I realized the situation I was now in. If I wasn't going to be killed last time, who knows what they're going to do with me now? Why would they go to all this trouble just to kidnap a 17-year-old girl? Questions swarmed around in my head, slowly forming a migraine at the back of my head before I attempted to sit up. I wasn't in the same room as before. This time I was laying on what seemed like a never-ending bed. That's all I could take in right now in my current panic. "Isabella, please," the man pleaded, his eyes now a soft blue color in contrast to his bright gold ones from last night as he stared into my own chocolate brown eyes. He was looking as vulnerable as ever. I felt my eyes widen as the events from last night replayed in my head. He had did something to my neck. All I felt was excruciating pain before I felt my world fade into darkness. My hands immediately shot up to my neck, only to be caught by his large ones, cupping my small cold ones in his hands as he slowly brought them down to my lap once more. He shook his head and stared back at the doctor, who had been watching the scene that was playing out in front of him with curious eyes, his eyes flickering between me and the man before his gaze caught a hold of the man's. My eyes flickered back to the man's, who seemed as if he was staring into space, in his own word, before he snapped back to reality and turned back to look at me, his blue eyes once again catching a hold on mine. My eyes never left his as before the door closes with a bang, causing me to jolt slightly with the sound. Ever since what happened, the smallest of sounds could set me of and make me jump. "Do you want a drink?" his voice asked, coming out raspy as I followed his gaze to a glass of clear liquid that was sitting on the bedside table beside me, glistening from the light that streamed through the small gap from the drawn curtains. My mind flickered back to the previous experience from not so long ago. He got angry at me then when I didn't drink the water. What would he be like now? I looked at the liquid intensely. It wasn't water, I knew it wasn't. Before he drank some to show me when I doubted him this time, I just felt his stare burn through the side of my head. I looked away from the liquid and back towards my joined hands on my lap that were laying on top of the silky black material that was covering me, along with the jumper that I remember from last night was still placed on me. I felt the bed dip closer to me, and I felt a warm hand on my chin as he directed me to look into his eyes. I attempted to avoid eye contact at all costs, but I could help but look anywhere but his blue eyes that reminded me of the deep blue sea, and I felt myself getting lost in them. I was brought back to reality when I felt his grip on my jaw become tighter as his gaze dropped to look at my lips for a few seconds before his stare returned to my eyes, when I realized that his eyes were no longer the soft blue color but had returned to its bright gold color from last night. I jumped back, but his hand sprung quickly to action and grabbed the sides of my waist before I could even come close to hitting the headboard behind me. "Stop moving away from me," he angrily muttered out as his hand reached out and grabbing the clear liquid from the bedside locker and holding it up to my lips, which I had previously sealed shut. "Isabella," he growled out, tightening his grip of my chin. I shook my head, my eyes wide with fear, as he sighed, holding the cup away from my face and letting his grip go of me as he placed the liquid back to its previous place on the bedside locker. "I just want to take the pain away," he mumbled, shaking his head before he stood up of the bed and taking steps backwards away from me before he turned around and walked towards a wooden desk that was placed at the other side of the bedroom. It was filled with papers stacked on top of each other in a mess, and a computer sitting to one side along with a phone. He sat down angrily at the desk before he began looking through the pages that littered his desk, his eyebrows furrowed in concentration, but every so often his gaze would snap to me, checking if I was still here. I pulled the thin blanket from around my legs before I felt cold air hit me. I shivered slightly before I ignored the feeling and swung my legs over the side of the bed. "Lay down, Isabella," his stern voice erupted throughout the room, and he glanced up at me, his hard eyes staring at my own. His whole structure demanded authority, and how those men bowed their heads at him last night. What was going on? Were they in some type of gang or something? I denied his request before standing up on my shaky feet. My legs felt like jelly, and all the blood seemed as if it was rushing to my head at once, making me fall to the floor. I waited for the impact of the collision with the hard wooden floor when I felt soft warm arms reach around me, preventing me from hitting the floor and possibly hurting myself further. I gasped in shock as I was hauled up and sat on the bed once again. His body stood between my legs as his hands moved to my cheeks. His eyes had flashed back to the blue color, and I felt remorse cross his eyes before it was replaced with gold, and I could feel the anger radiating of him. "That wasn't a request, Isabella. When I tell you to do something, you do it. No questions asked. You almost hurt yourself," he stated, crossing his arms in front of me. I ignored him, turning around so my back was facing him. I heard him sigh before I heard footsteps heavily Richarding away from me. I sat on the bed facing the other side so the man wasn't in my view anymore, and I slid over to the edge of the large wide bed before I was almost touching distance from a window that was covered with black curtains. I reached my hand out slowly towards the black curtain when a loud growl sounded from the other side of the room, making me jump back and pull my hand away from the curtains. "Don't touch the curtains," the man's voice rang through the room. My head snapped to look at him to see that he was standing up at the edge of the bed as he once again began striding towards me. "Is it so hard to sit on the bed?" he grunted, standing in front of the window. I turned my head away from him and crawled to the top of the bed, crossing my arms on top of my Richardac and pulling the thin blanket over my bare legs. "You need to sleep, Isabella," he mumbled, his voice now much more soft as he saw my fragile state. I lay down on the bed, pulling the covers up closer over my body. I didn't want him looking at me, however. I felt his hard stare burn into skin. I closed my eyes tight, attempting to forget about my situation. Maybe if I sleep now I will wake up back home, where I want to be and where I'm going to go back. 7. Isabella SPOV. I pulled the large t-shirt over my wet hair, carefully making sure that it didn't touch the shirt, before reaching my hand towards the door handle that led back to the bedroom and shakily turning it. The only time I had alone is when I used the toilet or had a shower, which was as often as I could. When I found out that I was allowed to, I went every few minutes, but only for the man, who quickly caught on to what I was doing, stopped me from doing so. "Is the water still hot?" his voice asked as he stood in a pair of jogging trousers, a towel hanging of his bare shoulder as his bare chest was exposed. My eyes flickered down to his chest that was accompanied by a six-pack before my eyes flashed back up to his face to see a smirk that was placed on his lightly chapped lips. I ignored him, walking over to the bed, dropping the towel on the floor, and crawled on top of it, leaving drips of water as a trail as I did. It's been 2 days, 2 whole days of being here, and I haven't left this bedroom once. He had, though, multiple times locking all the doors and windows, and there was a woman in the room that usually sat in the corner that never bothered to start a conversation. It's not like I was going to talk back or anything. He entered the bathroom, leaving the door wide open as he did so. This was the second time I had been somewhat left alone. He took a shower yesterday, and I counted how long it took him, around 15 minutes, which meant that I had 15 minutes to get over to his desk and use the phone. He reemerged from the bathroom once again, this time with the towel around his waist loosely. "Sit and don't move from the bed," he ordered, raising his eyebrows at me before turning his back and walking back into the bathroom once more. After a few minutes, steam had emerged from the bathroom, which meant that it was my time to start. I slowly made my way over to the edge of the bed, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My sock-covered feet hit the ground, and I slowly got up, careful to not make any noise. This man could hear everything I did. I stood up, taking a few steps, and stopped just before I had to cross the open bathroom door. I peered in, seeing that the shower was empty, making my eyebrows furrowed in confusion. All of a sudden, a slightly wet man emerged from the bathroom, the towel hanging from his waist as he raised his eyebrows at me. "Going somewhere?" he questioned, leaning against the wall, water dripping from him. My heart raced in my chest as he took a step towards me, which only caused me to take a step back before I felt my foot get caught, and I felt myself beginning to fall backwards, only for a pair of tan large hands to jolt forwards, grabbing a hold of my waist. He grabbed me, pulling me easily up, a little too quick, as I slammed into his rock-hard chest that was wet. I placed my hands on his chest, putting the sparks that erupted to the side, pushing myself away from him, causing him to let go of his current hold on me. I quickly turned around, my cheeks flaming up as I walked over to the bed, trying my best not to look back. I couldn't tell if he was amused or angry. It was hard to tell with him. "Be careful," he replied before turning and making his way back into the bathroom. I stayed out on the bed. I didn't want to chance anything now. He had let that one slip, but I didn't know if I was going to get any more slip-ups after that. After 15 or so minutes, he emerged from the shower wearing a pair of black jogging Richards on his Richard. Half, however, stood completely naked on the top as he ruffled the towel through his head. He sat down at his desk, grabbing the pen that lay at the side, and began to scribble things down on the paper beside him, grunting every so often out of anger. The phone snapped me out of my daydream as it rang loudly in the silent room. The man's hand snapped out to answer the phone and placed it to his ear. He was too far away. I couldn't make out what the other person on the line was saying, but by his expression he wasn't thrilled at what they had to say. His eyebrows were furrowed as he brought his hands to his lips, biting his nails as his knuckles began to turn white as he grabbed the phone so hard. I wasn't surprised it was still in one piece. He mumbled something into the phone so low I don't know how the other person on the line could hear it. He slammed the phone down a few seconds later in frustration before pushing back his chair and standing up. He stormed over to a wooden door and opened it. I craned my neck in attempt to see, but his broad shoulders filled the door before he reemerged not a minute later with a pair of jogging Richards in his hands and a shirt. He walked over to the bed, easily taking my small arm in his whole large hand and lifting me of the bed. I cringed as his hand wrapped around my arm tighter, making his head snap down to me before his grip loosed on my arm. I pushed away from his, taking my hand up to rub my now red arm. "I'm sure it will be bruised, Richardoro." His eyes were laced with worry as he glanced at me, then at my arm, before he walked towards a door that lead put into a corridor, the one I wasn't supposed to be in a 10 centimeters radius of. He pulled out a key from his pocket and unlocked the door, slowly pulling it open before he turned to me, reaching his long arm out to me. I took a step back. If he thinks I was going to follow him, he had another thing coming to him. "Isabella, I'm on my last nerve with you," he growled out, making me jump back from the sound, bumping into the wall behind me. I winced before standing up on my feet again, taking a deep breath as my heart raced in my chest. He sounded like an animal when he did that. I hated it. He only did it when he was angry. He shook his head at me, closing his eyes for a brief second. "So clumsy," he muttered to himself, but loud enough so that I could hear it. I walked a few steps towards him, but I kept my arms at my side. I didn't like the feeling of when I touched his skin. It was tingly and it tickled. He sighed, taking a step closer to me before grabbing my hand before I could react, and began walking out the door, shutting it close behind me but not locking it this time. Where was he taking me? Has he finally had enough of me? He's going to kill me, I know it. That was always his plan. And I began to think that because he had me for this long he wouldn't kill me. I stopped walking and attempted to pull my hand out of his hand, but my attempt was invalid as he only stopped and turned to look at me, raising his eyebrows to me. Isabella, I have no time for games, he shot towards me before turning back and walking again, dragging me along shortly behind him. I followed behind him, unaware of what I was doing, before we reached the end of the long hallway, and an elevator was in view. He reached out and pressed the button. It was completely silent until the noise of the elevator interrupted. The doors opened quickly before he stepped in, dragging me along with him. To say that I felt confined was an understatement. I never liked elevators anyway, but this was traveled so fast and it was a small square shape, I felt as though I couldn't breathe. The elevator came to a halt quickly, making me sigh in relief as we stepped out into what looked as a similar hall as to the one I was just on. However, this one was painted a different color and the noise levels had increased. His grip on me had tightened as we walked down the long hallway. I heard shouting and screaming in the distance and attempted to stand on my tippy toes to see out the tall window, but his shoulder blocked me from doing so, that and the windows were too high from my reach. A few people passed us on our travels, bowing their heads at the man doing so. Some of them didn't even look at me, where some would just stare at me. He came to a halt at a door before he reached his hand up, knocking hard onto it. His knuckles pounded hard on the door, and in an instant a girl appeared at the door. She only seemed a few years older than me but was tall and well built. "Alpha, what can I do for you?" she asked, looking up at him. Alpha. I heard a few people call him that. Is that his name? Such an odd name for someone to be called. Maybe it was common in America. "I need you to look after Isabella. Make sure she doesn't escape," he replied, his voice strong. The girl nodded before she glimpsed at me, smiling towards me kindly. Before looking back at the man, I decided I wasn't going to call him by his supposed name. I didn't like it. I need to be looked after. I'm 17, not 7, and even if I tried to, I couldn't escape. I'm pretty sure that I'm on 20 Alexander hour watch at all times. I don't even think this man sleeps. "Sure. Come on in, Isabella," she grinned, extending her door open wide enough for me to fit through. Before I could take a step into the room, I felt two hands grab my shoulders and the man turned me around to face him, while I was facing his chest because of the height difference. "Don't try anything?" he asked me. It sounded like a question. I looked up into his eyes, which were red and strained like he hadn't slept or eaten in days. His eyes also held anger and pain, as if it was hurting him to leave. I turned my head away from him as I heard him sigh before I felt his hand leave my shoulder and brush over my cheek as it traveled down to my neck, where I could hardly crane it. His eyebrows furrowed in confusion as his thumb trailed over the sore spot, only for me to reach up and grab his hand, pushing it off my skin. "Try not to hurt yourself," he mumbled, stepping away from me as I took a step closer to the girl's door. As the pair stared at each other, their eyes looked like there was some sort of cover on them. As they both stared into space, however, their eyes connected as they looked as if they were trying to communicate with each other. After a few seconds, the man changed his direction to me, sending me a look before he turned his head and began walking down the hall in a different direction. I heard a squeal from the girl that was standing in the doorway before her hand reached out, quickly grabbing onto my hand and pulling me into the room, shutting the door behind me. I set my eyes on the mini apartment that was laid in front of me. To my right there was a small kitchen with a few cabinets and appliances. As my eyes scanned the room, I spotted a sofa along with a TV opposite it, and to top it off there was a double bed laid on the other side of the room. "It's small, but I guess it's home," the girl sighed from behind me as she began walking in the direction of the sofa before she plopped herself lazily onto it, picking up the remote that was laid beside her. "Come on, Isabella," she smiled, looking at me for a brief second before turning her attention to the TV. I slowly made my way over to the sofa, sitting down at the edge of the seat. Why did he bring me to this place? I mean, anything to get out of that room, but why didn't he just get that other girl to sit with me again, one he'd done before? "Alpha tells me you haven't spoken since you got here," she muttered, her eyes still focuses on the screen as I stared at her. I bit my tongue. I wasn't going to talk to anyone. Not until I got home, and I'm pretty sure he and everyone else here was going to get annoyed if I didn't talk soon. "I know, I get it. It's scary. I can't imagine the pressure of being the Alpha's mate," she spoke, her words coming out quickly. My eyebrows furrowed in confusion at her. Alpha's mate? What was that? What did she mean under pressure? All these questions swirled around in my head, making it start to pound before I was about to give in and open my mouth and ask a question when her head snapped towards me. "Oh shit. Please don't tell Alpha I said anything. He told me not to. Why did I have to do that?" The girl groaned, her eyes pleading with me. She was scared of him. Everyone here seems scared of him. I mean, I understand why. He was huge and bossed everyone about from what I have seen, and everyone did as told and bowed at his presence. But why should she be scared? She wasn't the one that was kidnapped, I was. A pain in my chest started to occur along with the pain in my head that seemed to start to travel down to my neck, where I could still feel his thumb gently stroking over it. My breathing began to get heavier as I closed my eyes. It was like a couple of days ago when I was at home. Only this pain was much worse. It was too hard to deal with. I let out a cry as pain exploded from my neck and I felt my head get light. Isabella. What's wrong? Isabella, open your eyes. I heard her voice, though it was distant and it was barely hearable. My visions began to fill up with black spots as I tried to reopen my eyes, but they were too heavy, so heavy. What was happening to me? Had he drugged me or something? This filled my head as I felt my world fade out. Curious about what happens next? Subscribe and let the adventure continue.